Right, hello and welcome to the Formula E qualifying watch along. And I'm just currently trying to figure out something. Well, that's for the next stream in the day. So we're here at Jakarta in Indonesia. This is the qualifying session. For those who are not familiar with Formula E's qualifying format, it is a series of two groups, Group A and Group B, each 12 minutes long. And then we go into the quarterfinal duels, where 8 of the drivers will battle off against another driver. And then into the semi-finals, where 4 of them battle against another driver. And then we go to the finals for the battle for who gets pole position. And I'm in charge of that this weekend. I shall pass over to TNT in a moment, given I believe the session is about to get underway. Technically, I believe the session was meant to start 2 minutes ago, but I'm guessing there must have been some sort of delay. But I shall pass you down to TNT, and hopefully they don't make me pass right back.
It's a very good question. I think it leaves a bit of uncertainty. We don't yet know who's going to replace him. I think the next couple of months are going to be very important for that team to shape their progress into the next era, really, into Gen 4 and during next season.
And then obviously the fact that Nick Cassidy's potentially leaving. Where's he going?
Yes, the rumour mill is pretty strong on that one. I do believe that he is leaving, from what I hear, and I think he's going somewhere great. So I think we're going to see Nick fighting at the front and continuing to win races in this championship.
Yeah, let the silly season commence. We do love it. Now don't get anywhere, because in 10 minutes qualifying will start and we will find out who can hustle in the heat and take pole position.
So qualifying starts apparently in 10 minutes time. Whereas I was given information that it was meant to start at 10 minutes past. So I'm guessing that was a mistake made by Joshua in his rush, that he must have put down a 1 instead of a 2. Which, honestly, it does explain why it looks so long in this little timetable of streams I have to do this weekend while Joshua is away at Alton. Which, by the way, I believe that will be streaming today, and then also tomorrow here on the main channel, as well as MotoGP this weekend will primarily be on the second channel, but also the race will be put onto the first channel, as well as Moto 2 and Moto 3. And it's BTCC as well, and Formula E here on the main channel. Now, TNT are currently on a ad break, so instead I am going to give you a recap of what happened in FP2 for those that missed it. Now, before FP2 began, there was quite a bit of rain that fell, so that left the track actually being quite damp, and that did cause quite a few problems in FP2, because the racing line was basically abandoned for majority of the session, and you couldn't actually see where it was, and you could see quite a lot of the drivers not going anywhere near the racing line, and it's going quite wide around each of the corners. The final corner of this circuit in particular seemed to be quite an issue, where people had to avoid the barrier, or the wall, at the final corner, because the rear end of the car kept sliding into it almost. Thankfully, we had no incidents in FP2, given the fact that the track was damp. That was very surprising, which also made the dust that was in the air actually turn into this sort of mud type mixture on the cars, which I'm sure is not good for them. I actually think it's kind of worse than the dust when I think about it like that. But the racing line eventually started to dry out and we began to see where it was. But by the time that happened, it was 5 minutes to the end of FP2, so not everyone was able to improve their times. I think the only person who was actually able to get quite a good time out there was Hughes with a 1:13.6, I believe. Everyone else was at least a second and a half slower than Hughes' time, and I believe I can actually finally pass back to TNT, so I shall do that now in preparation for the start of qualifying.
To the Hard Rock Stadium. Wow, cannot wait for that one. Doubleheader in Jeddah again. A new one on the calendar is we're racing in Madrid in Spain, which is where we tested earlier in the season. Of course, we couldn't have a Formula E season without Berlin on it. A doubleheader in Monaco again. A TBC, but we might have a few ideas of what that is. We can confirm soon. And then back in Shanghai, Tokyo, and finishing off, as we always do, in London. A slightly longer season as well, finishing in mid-August. I mean, James, racing in the Hard Rock Stadium, that's going to be so cool.
It's going to be amazing. The circuit is going to suit Formula E racing so well. Great layout, amazing opportunity for the whole championship and for all the people in Miami.
I'm just going to interrupt them briefly just to tell you who it will be in the Group A of qualifying. In Group A, it is Roland, Da Costa, Byrne, Cassidy, Dennis, Van Dorn, Mortara, Muller, Bird, NATO and Maloney, meaning every other driver on the grid will be in Group B. Passing back now to TNT.
I knew that is for sure. Cannot wait for that one. There's also been a little bit of news about the Gen 4 car, which is due to hit the roads and hit the tracks in 2026 at the start of season 13. Now, James, you're always pretty close to the gossip, but in this case, you are so close to the action because you've actually been testing and helped develop the Gen 4 car. What can you tell us?
It's amazing. It's such a huge step in technology, performance, the opportunity for the engineers to get involved with so many new details in terms of engineering, software side, and we're going to see such a big step in performance. There's so much excitement coming in this championship. I can't wait for it.
I mean, Katie, it's kind of insane. So at the moment in the race, the drivers get access in race mode to 300 kilowatts. The new Gen 4 is stepping up to 600 kilowatts. That's double the power available. What?
I think it's going to be incredible to watch. And when you think about it, the street circuits, the limit is going to be so much higher than it has been in the past with that extra power.
Oh, cannot wait. Well, we'll be bringing you more updates on the Gen 4, particularly from James. Now it is time to get qualifying underway here in the heat in Jakarta. Let's go to our commentators, Tom Brooks and Anna McNish.
Welcome along to qualifying for round 12 of the ABB FIA Formula E World Championship. We are back in Jakarta. Once again, after a year off in Season 10, Season 11 sees us returning to this part of Southeast Asia. And what a place it is for a race. A fan favourite and a driver favourite, this circuit. And I'm sure it is going to be very interesting to see what is going to happen in terms of qualifying action. Lots of stories going on in the paddock about driver lineups in the forthcoming season, but also about what's going to happen in terms of the Drivers' Championship for this year as well. You can see from these pictures earlier on this morning, as we went into free practice 2, it was quite wet out on track. The upshot is now, as we head into qualifying, it is significantly drier, very, very humid out there onto the circuit. And as we get our first group stages of qualifying underway with 11 drivers out on track, we'll see what is going to happen. The Drivers' Championship, as we head into this one, Oliver Rowland leads it by 68 points over Pascal Wehrlein. He will be out in Group A, will Oliver Rowland. He'll be joined by Antonio Felix da Costa, Jean-Eric Vergne, Nick Cassidy, Jake Dennis, Stoffel Van Dorn, Eder Mortara, Nico Muller, Sam Bird, Norman Nato and Zane Maloney. Alan Carr's filtering out onto the track for the first time, and the circuit looking significantly better than it was in terms of the spray earlier on this morning, but there are still quite a few damp patches.
Yeah, it actually was a funny session earlier on because it started in wet, dried up, I would say, in principle through it. Wasn't completely dry at the end. The circuit was still wet on the surface. However, the other thing was it did not increase in speed. Actually, at the end, it was slower than it was when it was a little bit more moist. So in that respect, it was a bit of an odd one, but now it is predominantly dry. You can see that there is the very clear section where that you've got the dry section and then the small damp part as they come down into the hairpin here. But in all intents and purposes, it's dry.
Well, dust has been a big talking point in the dry conditions in Free Practice 1 yesterday. That dust turned into dirt this morning. Cars were absolutely caked in it once they came in at the end of Free Practice 2. A lot of clean-up jobs for the teams to do. Difficult session also for Nick Cassidy in the Jaguar. Yesterday in FP1 we saw a suspension failure for Robin Fright, and we also saw the same thing happen to Nick Cassidy this morning. The upshot is that Cassidy didn't end up in the barrier like Robin Fright. However, it did cut short his running. He only got a handful of laps in compared to everybody else. He did 12 laps in total at the end of FP2. Everybody else around 21, 22. So he's kind of going into this session with less knowledge compared to those around him.
Yeah, I think there's going to be a couple of things just to keep an eye on here. One thing that we saw yesterday in Free Practice 1 was that actually it's quite a hard circuit for the tyre because there's a lot of long corners, so therefore tyre temperature is pretty key, and trying to make sure you can control that, get your lap time in early, so you want to try and get something in the bank. And the other reason for that is there's been a few spins and bits and pieces, so yellow flags.
Okay, keep working on brake warm-up.
This is all about tyre preparation before they go for a flying lap. But I think you want to really get one in the pocket in case your second run is compromised by yellow flag or something that's out of your control.
Yeah, that's exactly it. 11 minutes, 12 minutes in total in this session with 11 drivers in it. And essentially, you've got to be in the right place at the right time, especially when you're in groups like this as well. I think it's going to be interesting to see what will happen. You can see drivers warming their tyres up and a lot of dust offline as we head down towards this first corner. Lap times in the dry conditions earlier on for Free Practice 1 yesterday were sort of in the mid-106s.
106.0 was the quickest, 106.050 was the fastest, but it's definitely not got that pace at the moment, I would say. It's also a lot dustier than I expected. You know, we saw the cars earlier on in the wet, and they were look as if they had done, the RAC rally. But in that respect, now it's just dusty, as we see.
Yeah, that's
sorry, Zane Maloney. Apologies there. Zane Maloney coming down and to finish a lap. But yeah, it's 1:17, so they're significantly off. This is just pure build-up laps at the moment.
Absolutely, yeah. Early stages of the session, sort of what we're used to seeing. Tyres, as you say, Alan, keeping those in the right operating window. It's incredibly hot, incredibly humid here at this circuit. The track conditions are going to be improving, you can imagine, as the session goes on, but also the track temperature is going to be rising. So I wonder whether we'll see drivers trying to get those banker lap times early on in the session, and whether there'll actually be any relative improvements later on.
Yeah, well, we don't know too much about the circuit and the evolution of the circuit. We're surprised how it did not evolve when it got dried earlier on. So, we have to sort of keep that in mind. But with that knowledge, I would definitely want to make sure we got one in the pocket. And then after that, you see the rest of the session. There's still 7.5 minutes to go, so nobody's really tried to get one in the pocket at the moment.
Yeah, still very early days in this session. Some big names in this one, and we're expecting qualifying to have a lot of emphasis on the race. It's not going to be a pack-style race like we've seen in previous Formula E events relative to others. I think it's going to be more traditional in terms of Formula E, so that means qualifying is going to be absolutely critical. If you're Oliver Rowland, a place in the duels is very, very important, because if you're not there, then it's going to make this afternoon a lot more difficult.
Yeah, certainly for this session is now there's times popping in 3, 4, 5 seconds quicker than previous laps. For this session, it's all about getting through. It's about being in the top 4. And for Oliver Rowland, he's had such a sterling season so far. He's got such a big points gap. If he's not, then I don't see it being critical to ultimately if he can win the championship or not. However, it does put him into a much better position where he's out of the battles and the scraps and the first lap incidents and things like that. And so he'll be looking just clearly to try and get into that top four. But, you know, clearly got the pace because he's had it all season. And to be honest, he had it last year as well.
Other drivers who expected to do quite well. Edo Mortara, he was pretty handy in FP2 this morning. I was chatting to one of the team earlier on, and they reckon that he could be on for a podium right up close, though, against the wall as he comes down into the hairpin of turn 13. He's beginning to push the limits here, is Edo Mortara. This would be a pretty good bank lap time in the early stages of the session for him if he continues in the same trajectory to the end of the lap.
Yeah, quickest in the first and second sector as he comes through the long left-hander leading into the final corner. Entry to that's a little bit wet. Lost the rear a bit on entry, so he lost a touch of time there and pops himself into quickest 1:10.7. So the circuit's about 4 seconds slower than what it was. However, admittedly, that was on a higher power lap. They're only at 300 kilowatts at the moment.
Yeah, or Da Costa deep then down into the final corner as well. Not the first driver that we've seen going wide down there. He comes across the timeline, goes in fifth fastest at the moment. Cassidy improves into sixth. As I mentioned earlier on, he was one of the drivers who was unlucky in FP2 after missing out on running yesterday. He is the most recent winner in Formula E, courtesy of that victory in Shanghai a few weeks ago. He's just behind the Porsche here at the moment of Da Costa as he comes from the first sector. And Cassidy looked like he was on the start of a fly, but he's now backed off on that lap. It's an interesting point as well, because there's a lot of blind and fast corners on this Jakarta circuit here, Alan, and traffic was a real problem in practice. Don't think any drivers got penalised as such, but in qualifying, there is a possibility that if you catch the wrong driver at the wrong time, you're on a slow lap, they're on a fast lap, that they could be incurring the wrath of race direction.
Well, 2 drivers did get a reprimand in free practice 1 yesterday, being Sebastian Buemi and Lucas de Grassi for going unnecessarily slow in the last couple of corners, trying to open the lap, trying to get a lap, and that's a bit wide by Roland as well. He's currently down in 10th place right now, as he's doing his quickest lap of the session so far. His personal one, but it's not going to be overall quickest, that's for sure.
Oliver Roland on that personal best then, coming through the final sector. Just he seems struggling to get the front tyres gripped up at that last corner. Comes across the timing line then here. Let's see what the Briton can do. He's up to 4th fastest for now, so he'll need to go again, because you would imagine there are going to be a lot of drivers improving in time. I suppose it's a bit of a disadvantage in one respect for Nissan, because they've got both drivers here and they'll be wanting them to both get through in this session.
You know, realistically, they've got one driver that is very much up at the front, being Oliver Roland in the championship and consistently performing. Ideally, you want both, but if you can only have one and you're compromising anyone, then unfortunately for Norman Nato, he'd be the compromised party in this one. Yeah, but it's not that stage at the end of the day. They've got the ability to run both of them. Zane Maloney pops himself up into 2nd place.
Yeah, Roland complaining on team radio a couple of moments ago about being blocked as well on his flying lap, so I wonder if the stewards again might be taking a closer look at that. We're on board here with Antonio Felix da Costa, currently down in 10th fastest as he makes his way through the final sector. That's out of turn 16, where the attack modes will be activated in the E-Prix later on this afternoon. Down into turn 18, aims it for the timing line then here, does Antonio Felix da Costa. And what can the Portuguese driver do? It's up to 2nd quickest. He was a driver who fought for victory here back in season 8, if you remember that colossal tussle that he had with Mitch Evans. Let's have a look at Roland then on this flying lap and see what happened for the British driver. So, it's his teammate. It was Nato through the tight and twisty corners here that he just came up to at the wrong time.
Yeah, a little bit of team should be a little bit more over that, to be honest with you.
So Roland,
unless they were, and Norman just misjudged them.
Yeah, well,
but just one other factor here you saw, and Oliver Roland was a perfect example of how dirty the circuit has become after the rain as well, because the way they're throwing the car around, it's sort of sliding on top of the dust to some extent. And into this final corner, he was much narrower than anyone else, trying to keep onto the drier part of the track, which is more to the middle, leading into the last corner. Not really sure it worked, to be honest with you.
So, minute and 30 seconds to go then in this Group A session. Maloney currently 4th quickest for Lola Yamaha apps. I wonder if there's an opportunity for some of the teams that we haven't necessarily seen in the duels all that often, which includes Lola Yamaha apps for that matter.
Yeah, but that car's been quicker, and I'd say Zane and Lucas Di Grassi, they have been stronger in qualifying in the race. You know, being able to get the maximum power out and to deliver it in one lap is significantly easier and doesn't require the experience in the championship that proving it over the course of a race distance does. And so I expect them to be a lot more competitive in qualifying trim than they would be in race trim normally.
Jack Maloney, of course, never raced here. David Beckman, incidentally, the other full-time rookie on the grid, or one of the other full-time rookies on the grid, has raced here because he was in with Andretti when we were here back in season 9.
You see them all backing up, trying to get that last lap, and basically a walking pace through the second last corner. As now they're all opening up their lap with 33 seconds to go.
Yeah, they're all trying to find track position then here, aren't they? And see whether they can just go those last few tenths of a second. So Mortara currently quickest at the moment by nearly half a second over Antonio Felix da Costa. Sandbird's up there in 3rd place, which would be a very welcome result for the British driver if he's able to make it through. But there's a lot of personal best sector times coming in, so no surprise. So it could be a case of the last driver to cross the line with the evolution of the circuit in this session. What can Jean-Eric Vergne do? Missed out on the duels here by 1,000th of a second back in 2023, and he's looking pretty handy here in the second sector, up by a couple of tenths of a second. Van Dorn has just crossed the line meanwhile. He's now up into 3rd place in the Maserati, and a moment there for Oliver Rowland coming through.
Very, very wide coming in. He did that on the previous lap as well. Locks up the rears, runs a little bit wide. So this is going to be quite critical for Oliver Rowland.
Yeah, Vergne coming out of the final corner. What can the French driver do then? On the podium for DS Penske very recently, and goes to the top of the pile by nearly half a second. That was a fantastic lap time there for Rowland. He comes across the timing line and doesn't improve. Oliver Rowland is out of qualifying and the car's crabbing. So I wonder if the British driver hit the wall on that final flying lap, because, well, it certainly looks like the car wasn't handling as good as it should do. Other drivers coming across the line. Casti's got himself up into 4th place, knocked out Antonio Felix da Costa. Sandberg has improved, but he's only 6th quickest at the moment. What about Eder Mortara? 3rd fastest for him, and I can't see anybody else improving behind. Stays 3rd quickest then. So, at the end of Group A, it is Vergne, Dennis, Mortara, and Nick Casti, who got very minimal running this morning, who progresses forwards into the dual stages. The big upset, though, is that we lose Da Costa, we lose Oliver Rowland, the championship leader, and Norman Nato in the second of the Nissans, compounding the Japanese manufacturer's woes. He was slowest of the lot, down in 11th.
Well, that was definitely not what was expected. And there's been an incident between Van Dorn and Da Costa that's also been noted as well. That was out of camera shot. So I think we need to have a little look into why Rowland, it was not just that mistake at the hairpin, what the reason was that he wasn't able to make it through.
Yeah,
9th row of the grid.
Not good at all for Oliver Rowland. Qualifying, as we said, a lot of emphasis on that this weekend, and it's a very big task now for the E3.
TNT Sports.
Right, so I'm going to keep it on battle screen for just a moment while I get this writing down for Group A sorted. It's a bit more difficult to do when you do not have a second commentator with you. I shall talk about a couple of incidents which I saw in the track conditions while our break is on, and I am about halfway through writing the results for this. Hold on. Do you know what? I'll write them down as I say them. Right, so finish atop of Group A was Vergne with a 109.460, followed by Dennis, who had a 109.922, almost 0.5 slower. Then we had Mortara in 3rd, And then in fourth, we had Cassidy, which is a lot of improvement from what we saw this morning from Cassidy. I've finished writing down the results. A lot of improvement from what we saw this morning from Cassidy, well, about an hour or so ago in FP2 when he came last and actually barely went out on the track. So I think that was mainly due to a wheel issue. Da Costa is 5th, Bird is 6th, 7th is Muller, Van Dorn is 8th, 9th is Roland, Maloney is 10th, and NATO is in 11th. Now, the track condition, compared to how it was about an hour or so ago, has gotten... Okay, it's gotten less wet. There are still slight, very light patches of wet on the track from where it hasn't quite dried yet. And you can see that most of the track is dry. But after the rain, now we know that dust was an issue before the rain, and then the mud, dirt, whatever you want to call it, became an issue for the cars afterwards. But I've noticed from the sound that it is being made on the track that it's kind of gravelly or grainy, which can't be doing any good for the tyres. And there were a couple of incidents between Van Dorn and Roland, and it was Van Dorn and Da Costa, was it? And it's NATO and Roland. Now, about to head into Group B with Verline, Barnard, Gunther, De Vries, Ticktum, Buemi, Hughes, Degrassi, Evans, Frines and Beckman. I shall hand you over to TNT.
Group B, Alan, is it an advantage compared to Group A? They're just similar.
Yeah, they get a bit of a feeling, especially if one of their sister cars was out in that session, so they actually have got a bit of more of a deeper knowledge. For example, Pascal Verline, they'll be able to take the information from Antonio Felix da Costa and to be able to understand that. And so therefore it can be definitely an advantage. You see what people are doing, you watch the television, and you've got a little bit more data.
Well, what we saw at the end of that session was a lot of improvements. Track evolution, quite clearly, being a factor to that. So should we expect the same for Group B?
Yes, I think so, because the circuit will be cleaning up still. Again, it maybe doesn't have that same sort of 5-6 tenths of a second jump, but still 4 or 5 tenths. Robin Frines?
Feedback from Nick. He says the tyres felt quite stable across all the laps, and it's really important to stay on the line, as we said. So any amount that you go off is a big penalty.
It's almost like a wet circuit, this, without the rain, isn't it? You go offline and, well, a lot of dust, but also a lack of grip.
Yeah, the thing is that it is just the dust and the dirt and the marbles and everything that's offline. But if you just happen to be a little bit out there, then you lose a lot of time. And that's ultimately going to be about how do you balance that pushing and attacking and aggressiveness in qualifying, but still keep it within the margins and a very, very narrow line as it actually turns out to be.
Looking at the two Cooper Kiros, and David Beckman just in front of teammate Dan Ticktum. Beckman's made it to the good on a couple of occasions. Ticktum's had the better performance in the races, though.
Well, Ticktum's got a lot more experience in the races, and I would say the other thing is just looking at the final corner. It looks quite a bit drier on the entry to the corner than what it was earlier in the first session.
There is Nick Cassidy. He is in the dual stages for Jaguar. Missed out on the dual stages when we were last year in Jakarta by 1 place in 2023. Managed to right those wrongs. Now back with his race engineer Phil Ingram, a pairing that had so much success and nearly won the title back in season 10 as well. A missed opportunity there.
They should have, would have. If he hadn't spun 2 laps from the end in Portland, I think he would have been champion.
Let's have a look at Oliver Rowland. This is what happened for him in the group stage of qualifying just a few minutes ago. Into the wall on his final flying lap. The car was crabbing all over the place for the remainder of it, and this is just coming through the fast right-hander. Car not looking stable at all. And the wall greeted the championship leader on the outside.
He was a millimetre on the inside outside to the inside wall and pushing to the limit.
Roland's car from
That's definitely more of a
Group
kiss of
A
the ball.
really was seeming to struggle
so
quite a lot.
The upshot is that Roland and Nato, the two
Condition of
Nissan
the
teammates,
track.
out of the group stages of qualifying. And as we said, there's a lot of emphasis on qualifying position and grid position here this weekend. And it's going to be an interesting task to see what he will be able to do. So no real representative lap times coming in at the early stages of this Group B session. Drivers just getting heat into the tyres and the brakes, getting them into the right operating window. It's interesting actually as well because what we saw in Group A were drivers going out and staying out for the whole of the session, coming into the pit lane. But I assume that is because the track is so suboptimal in terms of the conditions.
It's improving, but we also heard the feedback from Nick Cassidy that the tyres were stable across it, so you run and you're just improving as the circuit's improving. So actually, if you're on the track, you can improve your lap time. If you're in the pits doing an adjustment, you certainly won't be improving your lap time.
Yeah, it's a very good point. And also, we've all been in this car on circuits. But if you get a yellow flag at the end of the session, you're in the wrong place at the wrong time. That can tell you lap. We have seen that on a few occasions so far this year.
And there's also a little bit longer, it seems to be, in the build-up process as well to get them into the right window, so you don't have that extra lap to maybe pop into the pits to do a tyre bleeder or something.
Looking at Sebastian Buemi coming across the timeline in the division. Teammate Robin Frantz just behind him there as well. So the two divisions in formation out in the first corner. This is their first attack lap through the first sector. This is where Roland bifted into the barrier in FP1 yesterday. No such problems here for Buemi, but you can see as he gets the power down, the car's sliding away.
Yeah, but any time you're seeing dust being picked up, then that's time lost, because that means the driver is off the optimal line and he's effectively on the dusty, slippery part of the circuit. So if you see dust coming back up, so you see it's clean there, there's no dust. If you see dust coming back up, then it's not ideal.
Taylor Barnard, keep an eye out for him as well. He's been very quick so far in his full-time rookie season for Neil McLaren, and a lot of teams, I think, trying to sniff around for a signature and a bit of paper. But Ian James, team principal of Neil McLaren, saying that he's very confident that Barnard is going to be going nowhere for 2026 in whatever guise that team will look like. Let's have a look, though, at what Buemi's lap time looks like as he comes to the timeline. This is the first representative time from the Swiss driver. He goes to the top of the pile with a 109.692. What about Taylor Barnard? Goes up into second quickest after just dropping a bit of time in the final sector. Jake Hughes was looking pretty handy this morning. He was quickest in the wets for Maserati. Both Maseratis not actually looking too bad at all, because Van Dorn was also inside the top 5. Possible opportunity then for them to shine here, but track conditions very different to what we had a couple of hours ago.
And Tictum up to third.
Good to see for Dan Tictum. Loves a street circuit, and if you remember back to Tokyo, was so close to his first ever pole position after hitting the wall on the final lap of the session. It was not to be for the Briton, but he did get his first podium later on that afternoon. So Evans currently P5 at the moment. Gunter only 7th quickest as well. Incidentally, Gunter has led 7 out of the last 9 sessions here in Jakarta. The only blocks on his top of it being one this morning, where he was down in 17th in FP2. But it is a circuit that he has gone well at. The German driver, 2 podiums the last time we raced here back in 2023. Which one of those was a win? A dominant one of that.
He's quickest in the first sector, Gunter, as we see Taylor Barnard just building up for another lap. This is going to be a quick time for Gunter.
Let's have a look at Barnard then as he comes around this final corner. Alan, as we come across the timeline, we're going to ride on board here with Taylor Barnard. Talk us through this lap and the adventures of this Jakarta circuit.
Coming down into turn 1, very, very deep, heavy braking, slightly bumpy actually. Don't use the full edge of the road. Turns in early because it's a wide, wide exit, and then allows it to run through this triple right-hander before you feed it into the left. Now really up against the wall. Coming into heavy, difficult turning, braking at turn 7. This is where you're sort of braking and turning and trying to get it in, trying to make sure you stay on the clean part of the line. And then there's a quick flick right, and then you're coming through into where we saw Oliver Rowland hitting the wall at this next corner. Very, very quick right-hander, close to the edge, and then a heavy braking down into the hairpin. Trying to get the car stopped. He turns in very early, trying to get to apex. Hits the slightly damp part of the circuit, which runs and pushes him wide. A little bit slow to get onto the power then from there. Now into the last two corners, flicks it left, runs all the way through, and then into the final corner. Need to get into the apex, need to get a clean acceleration and out over the line. Slight bit of oversteer, squeezed up against the wall, and that's one lap.
Yeah, lose a bit of time in the final sector then does Taylor Barnard. 6th quickest for the 21-year-old now, as well as we ride on board here with reigning world champion Pascal Wehrlein. He's currently 2nd fastest at the moment. The timer's counting down, 3 minutes left to go, so there's what, a possibility of 3 more flying laps in this session, maybe, as De Vries just pops it up to the top of the pile. But I would imagine we're going to see the timing screens lighting up very shortly, and those personal best and possibly even fastest overall sector times beginning to come in.
Yeah, they're definitely going to start as Dan Ticktum just pops himself up quickest at this moment with 2.5 to go. And the big people that are not in right now, Günther, multiple winner in Formula E and also very successful here, Taylor Barnard and Mitch Evans in 6, 7 and 8.
Yeah, a few big hitters that yet to make it through. We'll see whether they're able to make these vital improvements at the end of the session. Just looking here then at Sebastian Buemi, currently 3rd quickest for him. Been a particularly happy hunting ground at this Jakarta circuit. His best qualifying here was 6th place back in 2022. Other than that, a couple of 13ths the last time we were here in 23. About Mitch Evans, though, meanwhile, he is currently 2nd in the dual appearance overall tally, tied on 33 with Stoffel van Dorn for 2nd place. The only driver that's ahead of the 2 of those is Pascal Wehrlein, who's currently 4th quickest and into the duels. But Evans looking pretty handy here in the first couple of sectors and on for a possible improvement.
He's definitely going to improve if he makes the last corner. It's going to put him up and in and around with 1.5 minutes to go, so he'll get one more flying lap after this. 9-1 goes quickest, just a touch ahead of Ticktum, but that's not going to be the end of the game, I'm sure.
Slight nod of the head there for James Barkley, Jaguar TCS Racing team principal. There's no one James is being serious because he gets his readers out and he's concentrating on the screen. So, final flying laps about then to begin for Taylor Barnard. Jake Hughes there just behind in the Maserati. They'll be wanting to try and find a bit of space, will Jake Hughes, just to make sure that he's got enough opportunity. Look, there's a train of cars all following behind here, Alan. So I'd imagine we're going to get quite a few drivers slowing down in the sort of last part of this lap to try and find some clear air here.
Definitely are 44 seconds, so somebody could quite easily not make their lap if they get shuttled back too far. And that's going to be the critical thing. So you see now they're scrapping for position, as well as that last car is going to be pretty tight on it now, and that's not good.
Yeah, that's Degrassi there just mugging Wehrlein. Wehrlein's going to just trying to cool off and find some trap position, and this is getting pretty messy at the end of this session. The timer is counting down. Look at even the 2 Cooper Kiros coming up against one another. We come to the timeline then, so Wehrlein will get some trap position. He's got the 2 Kiros right behind him. The timer does count down. I think everybody's just about going to make it. They do as they come across the timing line, but Dan Ticktum's sounding a bit worried on the team radio we hear.
Yeah, but the one person that's not Günther, because he's actually going to cross the line now, so Günther's time will tell us whether he's in or not. And he does, he pops himself up into 3rd place as the checkered flag's out. So this is the final lap for everybody as they're now scrapping their way through it.
Barnard looking very quick in the first couple of sectors. He's up by a couple of tenths of a second on Mitch Evans' time. Wehrlein not particularly lighting the timing screens up here, and there was a great opportunity for the German driver. Unfortunately, it is not proving to be a particularly brilliant lap. He's made a bit of time up in sector 2, but he's still a fair way away from where he needs to be. A tenth of a second was the gap as Buemi's just improved up to the top of the pile. He's got a tenth of a second quicker than Mitch Evans. Has Barnard been able to keep it all together to the checkered flag? Comes across the line, goes fastest of the lot, a 1:08.968 for him. Can Wehrlein do anything? Currently 7th fastest, unless he has the mother and father of all final sectors as De Vries goes and equals Barnard's time at the top of the pile. Wehrlein does not improve and is out of qualifying. Ticktum pops himself up into 4th place and knocks out Mitch Evans there as well. So, at the end of Group B qualifying, it is Barnard, De Vries, Buemi and Dan Tincton, the 4 drivers that make it through. More disappointment here in Jakarta for another big name. Pascal Wehrlein out of qualifying and now under investigation for driving unnecessarily slowly, according to our timing screen. So could be set to go from bad to worse.
And it seems like they just really want to go really quickly off each of the session. As I am currently still writing down the results, since I will not be the one doing the races, so I want to make sure the one who does the races get as much information as they possibly can. Right, under investigation. Now, I noticed an incident. Quite near the end of the Group B session, involving, I believe it was Tincton, Beckman and Wehrlein. I can only assume it was then because that's the only thing that matches up with the rest of the timing screens and notes, where a traffic jam ensued. As I am writing the final elements of this, and I will talk about that more in a moment. But first I will go through the results from Group B. Barnard tops the session with a 1:08.968. Second is De Vries, which is quite good from him from recent turning events, with a 1:08.968. That is the exact same time. Barnard and De Vries setting the exact same time. A very rare thing to do, but also a very entertaining thing. I'm going to make a little note of that in the corner of my notes, just to help with any possible extra airtime. Just pointing to both of these. Right. So, Buemi came in 3rd, and then Tincton came in 4th, followed by Evans in 5th, Gunther in 6th, Wehrlein in 7th, 8th is Beckman, and gonna go back to this screen. Oof, I just scraped my nail accidentally against the paper. If anyone hates that too, oof, it shivers down my spine. Right, I believe I was up to Beckman in 8th, Knight is Hughes, Degrassi is in 10th, and Freund is in 11th. Yeah, apparently Hughes, by the way, is under investigation for driving unnecessarily slowly. I believe it was him. But the incident involving, there seemed to be a traffic jam around one of the corners. And it was Wehrlein trying to get past the teammates of Tincton and hold on, who's Tincton's teammate again? Beckman. Forgive me if I'm not familiar with the exact teammates of each other. I very rarely cover this. I do enjoy it though, very much. So, those going in to the quarterfinals will be Vern, Dennis, Mortara, Cassidy, Da Costa, Bird, Muller, and Van Dorn. What? They've got that wrong. I'm currently looking at the results here, and they have put the qualifying results as the 8 that go through wrong. They've got the first 4 right, but for some reason they have put the 4 other drivers behind the Group A as the others that are going through, which is completely wrong. I don't know why they've done that. It's not even a mistake on their part of, oh, they just put the same graphics, because there's 11. There's 11 cars that should be in there, and they've got that completely wrong. So a correction of that is from Group A going into the quarterfinals is Vern, Dennis, Mortara and Cassidy. And then from Group B, we have Barnard, De Vries, Buemi and Ticktum. I don't know what's going on with their graphics department, but I think someone needs to have a proper look at what they put up when it comes to the qualifying results. I shall pass you back over to TNT as they've come back from ad break now.
And in a circuit where we've seen qualifying be so important, he has a massive challenge ahead of him today.
We can't hear James. Thank you very much, James.
Oh, so they are having problems.
Oliver Roden has
Mortara and Dennis are first up.
He still has that cushion in the point standing, so it's not, the end is not in sight yet. Let's talk about what happened for Jean-Eric Verne. An amazing session for him, quickest in Group A. This is a massive opportunity for him to start fighting for, you know, second and third in the championship.
Yeah, it will be important for the teams as well. Obviously, they're now third place in the teams overall, so that will be massive points for them going into, if you can convert that, obviously, going into the rest of the season. But unfortunate for his teammate as well, Gunter. We've seen him on pole here before, so we were wondering if we were going to have a battle between the two of them in the duels, but not to be today. And yeah, Jeff put a great lap in when you consider the circuit evolution as well that's happening out on track.
Yeah, Antonio Felix da Costa, unfortunately, did not make it through to the duels, as did his teammate Pascal Wehrlein. Now, this is such a critical point for Porsche to bag some points if they're in the title fight for the teams, particularly. What have they got to do to claw it back in the race, and what do you think went wrong in qualifying for both of their drivers?
I think it was really close with Antonio. I think he was 5th in the group, so he was only one place and just bumped out at the last minute. So they have pace, but as you know, it's so tight in Formula E. I'm not sure, you know, when we look at how important qualifying is going to be here, I'm not sure how much they're going to be able to pull back, if they're going to be able to pull it back going into the race today. But yeah, I think for all of them, they'll be looking at Oliver Rowland also not in the groups and in the duels and thinking, okay, at least there's one thing there.
Yeah, breathing a small sigh of relief. Well, let's hear from Pascal Wehrlein now, who's with Alexa.
Pascal Wehrlein, neither Porsches making it through into the duels. What was going on out there in quali? Was it a tricky one?
Not really, to be honest. I just didn't get my laps. The first lap was good, but yeah, then on the second one and had a mistake in turn 10, and on the third one it was just chaotic with traffic. It was insane. So yeah, pretty disappointed because I think we should have been at the front.
Thank you, Pascal.
And then a brilliant story in the McLaren garage. I mean, look at Taylor Barnard there, quickest in Group B. He's just on flying form, race after race.
Yeah, he put a really impressive lap down. Yeah, I think you know, as a rookie coming into this, it feels like he's been here for years now, doesn't it? So many different surfaces to perform on. I mean, I was out on track today, and I would argue this is probably one of the hardest tracks to perform on. The grip is changing so much. If you get slightly offline, we've seen, I mean, in the team radios, we've been saying, just don't get any wheels offline because the penalty is so huge. So for him, he's being really precise here. And yeah, it was an amazing lap. He's very smooth, he's very consistent.
What I thought was really interesting was coming into this race weekend, Taylor Barnard said, I want to be ahead of the Porsche drivers. It's just 2 points between him and Antonio Felix Costa in the battle for third at the moment. And, well, it's looking positive. You know, he has done just that, qualifying ahead of both of them.
Yeah, I think even just so far, we keep saying it about how important qualifying is going to be. He's going to be feeling like he's in the flow this weekend, and I'm sure that he's got a really strong chance of coming out a step ahead in the driver standings now.
Yeah, and another driver who is seriously in the flow this season, Dan Ticktum. Amazing. Back in the duels. It's great to see. The performance just continues to come from him.
Yeah, I mean, on team radio, I think he was nervous then that it wasn't going to be enough. We saw all the drivers and the track evolution coming. I think he was one of the last to cross the line. So he managed to sneak up into the duels there, because I think for a while he was quite nervous that they were going to pip him to the point. But I was speaking to him literally just before you get in the car, and he was saying how important qualifying was, and he was really focused for it. So yeah, he's delivered today.
Well, let's find out, shall we? We have whittled it down from 22 drivers down to the fastest 8. It is time for the duels, and to find out who will take the coveted spot of pole position in Jakarta. It's going to be a tough one, but could Taylor Barnard take another pole here again? Let's find out.
So then, over to qualifying for the duels for round 12 of the ABB FIA Formula E World Championship. It is the Torino Jakarta E-Prix, and now we look to see who is going to be lining up where with the duel stages coming up here this afternoon. Quarterfinals, first of all. We'll have 4 groups of 2 drivers going out, then the 2 from each of those groups, or 1 from each of those groups rather, will be going through into the semi-finals, and then for the semis we'll go into the finals and find out who is going to be lining up on the front row, crucially who will be taking the important 3 points for pole position. So some highlights then from the group stages of qualifying. You can see the drivers out on track here at this Jakarta E-Prix circuit then, and you can see drying conditions after a wet FP2 this morning. I meant that the circuit was quite suboptimal going into this one, but also constantly evolving and improving. And there are always going to be some drivers that will be disappointed at the end of that session. But some of the big hitters that we were not expecting to be out included championship leader Oliver Rowland. This was Stoffel Van Dorn making his way around. Eden Mortara, who is going to be out in quarterfinal 1 in a few moments' time. He's had great pace so far this weekend, and this is a track he goes well at, Alan. If you remember back to season 8, he nearly won the thing for Ventura.
Yeah, this is a circuit that definitely Eden Mortara does go very well at. He's been in the duels before times around here, and he's doing a super job. But also Mahindra as well are picking up the pace. They've got a bit of positive momentum behind them. Confidence with the car. Nick Vries as well, who is competitive. And so I think it's going to, as we see the point where it all went wrong for Oliver Rowland there, where he kissed the wall coming through the very quick turn 12.
Yeah, big shame for him. Group B went out a few moments later, and as the track improved, lap times were about half a second faster in the second group compared to Group A. We did see a few slips and slides. I think that was Robin Freitz, and that might be what cost him an opportunity to improve in the closing stages, because everybody else was out to the end of that one. Freitz was in the pit lane, though, when the checkered flag fell. The upshot is, though, we did see Dan Tickton making it through, but there was a bit of an argument going out on track amongst the drivers, trying to find track position at the end of the group stages. Taylor Barnard was the quickest of the lot. A brilliant lap time from the youngster from Norwich sees him progressing forwards as well. So then, over to the duels, and here is how it is going to line up for round 12. So quarterfinals up first of all. We'll have Eden Mortara versus Jake Dennis, Nick Cassidy versus Jean-Eric Verne, Sebastian Buemi versus Nick de Vries, and then Dan Tickton and Taylor Barnard will go head-to-head against one another. One driver from each of those groups will go through into the semi-finals. 4 drivers in the next group, and then of course into the finals. It'll be 2 going head-to-head against one another for that front row. Well, this is going to be interesting. Jake Dennis versus Eden Mortara. Whilst we think about that, we'll look at some super slow-mos of Oliver Rowland and just reflect on the end of that session. Alan, we've spoken so much about the importance of qualifying going into this round, and well, it is going to be a bit of an uphill struggle this afternoon now.
Yeah, I think there's 2 parts to this. One is for the race itself, and the second one's for the championship. I think for the race, the important thing is that Rowland gets a good start. For the team, though, for Nissan, then they've got both of their drivers at the back, so it's going to be difficult to pull out some big points there. Porsche are in a much better position. However, for Verline, it wasn't 100% happy. Da Costa is a little bit closer to the front.
Yeah, Verline, the other driver in Group B who failed to make it through one of the other big hitters, second in the Drivers' World Championship at the moment, is the reigning world champion, and an opportunity for him to try and capitalise on Rowland's misfortune sadly amounted to nothing. As we wait for the quarterfinal to begin then here, we can see the sea in the distance. Very humid and very hot at this circuit. It is a wonderful place to go racing there. The fans love it here. They are flocking in their thousands to this track here this weekend.
Now the countdown. Which one of these 2 is going to do it?
Yeah, Eden Mortara versus Jake Dennis up along the way first of all. See how this one is going to work out then. Mahindra versus Andretti. Mortara versus Dennis then in the head-to-head. The Formula E predictor reckons that Eden Mortara has got the advantage. He was very quick in practice this morning. 4th quickest for the Mahindra driver. Hasn't yet finished on the podium in season 11 so far. His best finish this year was 4th place back in Miami. His teammate Nick de Vries, incidentally, has been on the podium for Mahindra, but now they exit out onto the circuit for their one and only flying lap. So it's one out lap, then one flying lap, and that is the end of your qualifying session. So it's one and done for these drivers. And of course, unlike the group stages of qualifying, we go from 300 to 350 kilowatts of power, and we've got all-wheel drive as well. And I have to say, the dry conditions here yesterday, these cars did look a bit of a handful.
Yeah, I think the circuit condition leans itself in that direction anyway. So they've got increased power, they've got a drier circuit, and therefore it is going to be without doubt on field. A lot of preparation to make sure that you have got your tyres up to the optimum operating window. However, saying that, a lot of this is going to be on field, about trying to make sure that you use that power in the right way. You don't get big power oversteer slides going on, and that is going to be a hard thing to manage.
Out of 5 quarterfinal appearances for Jake Dennis this year, he's won 2 and lost 3. Mortara has reached the quarterfinal duels on as many as 4 times this year, but has lost on every occasion. So the momentum not with the Swiss driver so far in terms of the stats, but he does maintain his 100% record of reaching the duels in all 4 of the Jakarta E3 that we've had so far here. We've been coming here since 2022, and but for a gap on the calendar last year, it has been a bit of a stalwart so far. Anyway, Mortara across the timing line then to begin his one and only flying lap down towards the first corner. It's a long run into there, and it's very deep on the brakes.
Yeah, nice on the brakes. Slightly wide coming out though, but he had it in nicely. Now starting to thread it through, as we see on the right-hand side, the bottom right-hand side, Jake Dennis, who he's competing with very early turn in, hits the curve. Nice by Dennis as well. Not too much oversteer. Just a little bit of corrections as they're coming through.
19.8 in the first sector for Eden Mortara. That's not bad at all there for him, but what can Jake Dennis do then? It's a 19.6, so he's a couple of tenths of a second ahead of Eden Mortara then here at the moment in the first part of the lap. Coming through turn 12, that's where Roland biffed it into the wall, and he was right up against it. There was Mortara. Dennis building up a bit more of an advantage there as we head through this second sector. This is a bit of a game of cat and mouse between these two drivers. Mortara still a little bit slower by a couple of hundredths of a second compared to Dennis in sector 2. So the momentum with the season 9 world champion so far here as Mortara exits out of the final corner. What's the lap time going to be for him as he comes across the line? It's a 1:07.289. 2 corners now remain here for Jake Dennis. One more as he comes through turn 18. And is he going to be able to out-qualify Eden Mortara and not the Mahindra driver out? He comes to take the checkered flag, and he does so by just 4/100ths of a second.
Yeah, but the last sector wasn't good by Jake Dennis. He had a big gap at the beginning of that sector, and he lost quite a lot of time there. So it was just by a little bit of a tickle at the end.
Yep, Jake Dennis then does progress forwards and into the semi-final stages of qualifying. So he really wasn't leaving anything on the table. He'll be delighted with that from Jake Dennis.
Well, he got through. Doesn't matter whether you go through by 4 seconds or 400ths, you're still through to the next section of it, but they'll need to look into that final sector if he wants to progress any further than this first duel stage.
So quarterfinal 2 then, Nick Cassidy versus Jean-Eric Verne, Jaguar versus DS Penske. Cassidy with a fair bit of momentum behind him courtesy of the performances in Shanghai, but let's be fair, Verne was no slouch there either. They're already beginning their flying laps, and Cassidy is really hanging it all out, isn't he?
Very, very tight through there. Nick Cassidy keeping it a lot tighter to make sure that he didn't run wide as Jean-Eric Verne crosses the line a little bit later, coming down into that first corner.
Verne, of course, the pole sitter for the inaugural Jakarta E3 back in 2022. 19.6 for Cassidy, so that's equal to what we saw from Jake Dennis a few moments ago.
Yeah, that tighter light seems to have gained a little bit for Nick Cassidy there, and he's also extending it as we've got Jean-Eric Verne coming. Sorry, this is Nick Cassidy coming down into the hairpin. Nice, neat and tidy coming in and out of it. Got the power down well as he accelerates into the final 2 corners.
Yeah, into turn 16, so nice and tight there for Cassidy. Burns drops a bit of time, though, in this second sector, so I think the Frenchman may have made a mistake because half a second is an absolute fortnight's worth of time, especially over the course of 1 lap. Kicks up a bit of dust, a bit wide there for Cassidy out the final corner. Comes across the timing line, takes the checkered flag with a 1:07.1. So not the quickest time that we've seen already in the duel stages, and Vern has quite clearly made a mistake here.
I think he's made a couple because he was wide when we picked him up then as well. And so therefore Jean-Eric Verne, not a good lap, a couple of big mistakes in there for him. But Nick Cassidy as well lost a little bit of time out of the final corner, got a bit wide. He floated the car in, beautiful to watch, but maybe had a little bit more in the bag for the next run as he comes out in the final corner.
Good lap, car's good.
Well, Phil Ingram and Nick Cassidy will be absolutely delighted with that one. This man here, Phil Charles, will not be quite so happy because Jean-Eric Verne failing to progress forwards. Quarterfinal 3 then, Sebastian Buemi versus Nick de Vries, Envision versus Mahindra. Buemi, we know, can be pretty quick on his day, but the Mahindras have looked very fast so far this weekend, and the momentum, according to the predictor, is with the Dutchman.
Yeah, so therefore I would suggest Buemi is going to be competitive then with the predictor side of things, because I would actually get some money on Buemi in this one, funnily enough, if he has a clean lap.
Yeah, 2 former world champions, of course. Season 2 world champion is Sebastian Buemi. Season 7 though for Nick de Vries. Through the first corner there for Sebastian Buemi, looks okay.
Yeah, he's a little bit wide though, and that's compromised him through this section as well. So he's later getting on the throttle, lost a bit of momentum all the way through that section.
De Vries with an initial advantage in the first couple of corners. Let's look at the first sector times, and De Vries with nearly 0.2 of a second over Sebastian Buemi, so quite clearly a stronger first start to the lap then.
Yeah, I think Buemi just was a bit wide in the first part and just couldn't quite get it back from there. It is very dusty. You need to be, if anything, turning in slightly earlier than turning in later.
The 6th dual appearance then for Nick de Vries, going well for him so far, continues to build out the advantage over the Envision driver through sector 2, now up to nearly 0.4 of a second as we come through the final sector. So this is proving to be an absolutely phenomenal lap here from Nick de Vries. Buemi catching a little bit in the final sector, comes over to the timing line to take the checkered flag, a 1:07.601 for Buemi. De Vries though, out of the final corner, he comes to break the beam, and what can the time be? It's a 1:07.1, so a good chunk quicker than Buemi. De Vries is through into the semi-finals for Mahindra.
So my statement about I think we should watch Buemi was completely wrong in this particular one. Not a very good lap by Sebastian Buemi. I think some mistakes in there early on in the lap was where it all just slipped away.
Always trust in the predictor, Alan. Let's have a look at this from Nick de Vries as we look at some super slow-mos. Left a fair bit of margin going through there.
Yeah, but I think that's one of the advantages. If you're on the grippy bit of the circuit, then you leave the margin. The margin's getting narrower.
So quarterfinal for a battle of the Britons then. Dan Tinctum versus Taylor Barnard. And Barnard, well, he's had the momentum over the course of this season, absolutely no question. 2 pole positions in 2025 for him. Dan Tinctum still chasing his first pole after 4 seasons in Formula E. Down to the first corner though in the Coupe Bakiro, and this could be Tinctum's time to shine. Looks okay through turn 1, and again through turns 2 and 3. Oh, a little bit of a slap of oversteer briefly on the way in, but otherwise all okay. What about Barnard through in the Neon McLaren then? Tighter line through turn 2 and 3.
Nice.
Yeah, looking okay so far here for Taylor Barnard. 19.5 for Tinctum in sector 1, actually quicker by 0.08 of a second over Taylor Barnard. So good start to the lap then here for the Coupe Bakiro driver. Heads down through turn 13, a little bit wide on the apex there. Might have cost him a bit of time. Taylor Barnard ready to harry it through and leaving nothing on the table at all. Very tight line through turn 12. We saw Roland coming a cropper with that then, as Tinctum makes his way through the final couple of corners. Barnard's brought the gap back to his favour. 2 1,000s in it as they were through the second sector. Tinctum to the timing line, a 1:06.958. This is going to be very close between the two. What can Barnard do in response? 2 100ths of a second in it as they come through the final corner. Tinctum versus Barnard. Who goes through and into the semi-finals here in Jakarta? It is Taylor Barnard by 0.005 of a second. That's a great lap time for the 21-year-old from Norwich. Barnard is into the semis.
Very good lap from Barnard, but I've got to say a very good lap from Tinctum as well. And it was just as he got out of the final corner, really neat time, he got the power down, and it was marginal in every sector.
Yeah, fantastic. So Taylor Barnard progresses forwards here in Jakarta. Dan Tickton will go no further than the quarterfinals. This is Alex Hui's viewpoint of it. Oh, excuse the language there in the garage. Obviously, emotions running high for Cooper Kiro, and Alex Hui
in
a
F1,
little bit disappointed with that one, understandably. But the upshot is that Taylor Barnard for Neon McLaren will progress forwards, and he will be going into the semi-finals, and will be going head-to-head with Nick de Vries as well, for that matter.
So just in comparison to free practice yesterday, the circuit's still about 9/10 of a second slower than it was when we arrived here. So it's not to the optimum grip levels yet. And so every time they're going to be going out, then it's getting quicker. And so therefore going into the semis and then ultimately the final, it will be definitely a different circuit.
Yeah, mega lap, so you're a quicker sector 2 and 3, just clawing back what you lost in sector 1 throughout the lap. Really, really good job.
Yeah, Tickton definitely had the advantage in the first sector of that one, but brilliant middle sector from Barnard.
Yeah, but let's be honest, he had 0.08 of a second advantage in the first sector.
Yeah, it wasn't much. But, well, very impressive lap time there from Taylor Barnard. But again, likewise from Dan Tickton, very fine margins in Formula E, as always.
TNT.
Right, so those were impressive times there from the drivers. So going through to the semi-finals, if I can get my words right, is Dennis, Cassidy, de Vries and Barnard. Barnard, 0.05 of a second difference between Tickton and him. That was the closest out of all of the quarterfinals, Jules. I think definitely Tickton and Barnard are definitely someone to watch, especially since Barnard topped the Group B charts. They were in the same group, weren't they? I can literally hear birds singing outside. That is how early it is in the morning here in the UK. And it's... Oh. We can already see who will be the next up for the semi-finals. And it looks like facing each other first will be Dennis and Cassidy. Why does that feel like a throwback to last year? A kind of like flashback to everything that happened last year. And I feel like I'm getting a cold worse just being in here because it's cold. Everyone said it was cold yesterday. I mean, it was warm yesterday and I was normal temperature. I was cold. I'm thinking I'm starting to adapt to the heat. And I'm saying this because TNT is currently on an ad break, so and they're currently in between sessions, so there is literally nothing to talk about. And I have not got any information that can be updated. So I'm kind of stuck in things. The track seems to have improved a lot, to be honest, from 2 hours ago. So that's good. That means more positive things for the race, I should think. Tomorrow's race, however, will probably not have as good a condition. But today's race definitely will. And yes, I have confirmed that there will be a today's race. I think Omi is taking that because I would, but I am going to be in the middle of a FP2 and a qualifying session for MotoGP on the second channel. So I will not be able to cover it. Though they're about to come back from ad break to start the process for the semi-final duels that are going on between Dennis and Cassidy and de Vries and Barnard. So I shall pass you back over to TNT.
We're waiting for that to kick off. Let's go down to Linktree, who's catching up with some of the drivers who sadly did not progress forwards from the other stages of qualifying.
Edo Mortara, into the duels. You maintain your 100% record of making it into the duel at every Jakarta E-Prix. How was that for you?
The dual lap was not ideal. Actually, the conditions were actually quite tricky out there. With the amount of rain that we had like during the night, it meant that track conditions were quite slippery. So it was quite difficult actually to put everything together. Not really entirely satisfied with my group lap and the dual lap. Unfortunately, we couldn't go through in the quarter. But like still, overall, pretty positive performance.
Yeah, and you and Nick making it into the duels, the only team to have both cars go through. If you're not satisfied with your lap and you're still managing that must mean you're in a pretty good place for the race.
I think so, and we were showing actually good competitiveness already yesterday in free practice. Strong race pace and also strong one-lap pace. I still believe that probably more was in the car today, and for sure we could not really extract it, but there is an entire race coming after, and hopefully we can do a good one.
More to fight for later on. Thank you, Edo. Generator Verne, a little way off there in the dual stages. Can you talk me through what happened on your lap?
Nothing special, I don't know. I just had no grip, very far off the pace, very poor lap, I don't know why.
Are you going to be able to have a look at that and work out what went wrong in time for the race?
Yeah, but qualifying is done and race is completely different to qualifying, so we'll see.
Completely different? How so?
Well, you leave 300 meters before the break, so,
All right, thank you, Jeff. Sebastian Buemi, tricky conditions out there by the looks of it. Talk me through your lap in quali.
Yeah, I'm kind of proud of my qualifying group run. I thought, I did a good job, steady and always pushing a bit more. Obviously, the track is getting quicker and quicker, but it is so dusty. If you get out of the racing line, you lose a second. So, I was just trying to not overdo it, and I think I did well. But then in the duel, I just took too much margin on the braking mainly, and that's what happens when you take too much margin. You just lose a few tenths, and that's it. So, in the end, still happy to start seventh, but yeah. With hindsight, I should have taken a little bit more risk in the duel.
Best of luck for the race. Thank you.
Well, good to hear there from some of our drivers who sadly have not progressed forward from either the group stages or the dual stages of qualifying here this afternoon in Jakarta. And seems like a few of them overdriving.
Yeah, overdriving and underdriving as well, and that's what Sebastian Buemi was saying. He was basically underdriving in the actual duels themselves, and so in the group stages he felt he was in a much better place.
Yeah, absolutely. There is Taylor Barnard inside the Neon McLaren garage. He'll be ready to go out very shortly in semi-final 2. Let's just remind you how we got here then for round 12 in Jakarta. Circuit continuing to dry. Quarterfinals, though, we had Mortara versus Dennis, Cassidy versus Verne, Buemi and De Vries, and Tincton and Barnard against one another. The upshot is semi-final 1 will be Dennis and Cassidy, semi-final 2, De Vries and Barnard. Two drivers will go forward from the semis into the finals, and that fight for pole position. Semi-final 1, Jake Dennis versus Nick Cassidy, Andretti versus Jaguar, Britain versus Kiwi. And who gets this one? Well, Cassidy's had 2 dual appearances consecutively, one in Shanghai and one now prior to that as well. And let's see whether he can stick it into the finals or whether it will be Jake Dennis. Dennis has now passed Mitch Evans for the most career dual final appearances in Miami as well. 11 to 10 between those two. And he's got good form here as well. The front row in Jakarta twice back in 2023. So he knows this place well and he runs well here as well.
Certain circuits and characteristics do tend to favour a car or driver. And if it's a car and driver, then it's a pretty good combination.
Whilst we wait for these drivers to get out on their warm-up laps here, Adam, we look at Nick Cassidy. Let's be honest, he's a bit of a dog of the season so far, but the last couple of weekends, in Shanghai in particular, he's been on great form. Where's his turnaround fortune come from?
such an intricate thing of driver and machine and team working together. But also the other thing that I think we forget about is the fact that the driver and the team and the car are competing against all of the others, and all of the others are improving all of the time. And I think there was definitely a big march by some of the other teams through the course of the winter. And we saw that with Andretti. They were super dominant with Jake Dennis when he won the championship. And the following year, there was just some subtle changes, and suddenly it wasn't quite with the same potential. And that happened to Jagger, and it's happened to Nick Cassidy and Mitch Evans. Last year, they couldn't do anything wrong, apart from the last race in London. But ultimately, everything was just going their way. And now that's not quite the case.
Dennis through the first corner there looked okay. We've now managed to slow these 2 laps down. See a bit of a rear instability going into that first turn there for Jake Dennis. And the upshot is that in the first sector, a 19.6 for the British driver, Nick Cassidy, 500 of a second up in the first part of it, but loses time overall in the first sector to drop a 10th of a second behind the Briton here.
Coming down now for Jake Dennis, down into the hairpin, big braking at 13, gets the car into the corner, whereas Cassidy's a little bit behind, but he's half a second now behind Nick Cassidy. This is going to be a real uphill struggle for Nick Cassidy as he's now coming down into that same hairpin where we picked up Dennis before.
Cassidy must have made a mistake quite clearly on that lap, because 0.6 of a second after being a 10th down in sector 1 is, well, a very big amount of time. Dennis comes across at the timing line. It's a 1:06.765, and yeah, Cassidy has
another big mistake.
Exactly, yeah, it's all gone wrong for Nick Cassidy, unfortunately, then here in the semi-finals. And as you can see, he's dropped down now over 2 seconds behind Jake Dennis. So the Season 9 World Champion will go into the finals, to the delight of the Andretti team and to Roger Griffiths. Jack Crawford there in the background just watching on as well. And Dennis is in that front row fight.
So that's him being in the front row 3 times now, Jake Dennis.
Here in Jakarta, yeah, very strong performances for him. You can see him fighting a bit of understeer through the first couple of corners, just getting that car rotated, but looks a lot happier with the balance of it. We need to see what went wrong, though, for Nick Cassidy on the other side of the coin there as well, because it all looked pretty strong to start with. A 10th of a second away, it's not too much time, but clearly something went awry. Going down into turn 16, let's work it out. Big slide, and just about avoided the Tech Pro on the right there as well.
But he was already half a second, 0.6 behind at that point, so earlier in the lap he had lost some time, whether it was in one moment or just slipping away.
Semi-final 2, who will be joining Jake Dennis in the finals then? Will it be Nick de Vries or will it be Taylor Barnard? Down into T1 here then for Nick de Vries. Mahindra versus McLaren. Pretty conservative through the first corner there, seemingly, for Nick de Vries. Maybe just leaving a little bit of margin on the table. What can Taylor Barnard then do as he comes down in towards that first corner? It's a fast approach into there. You can hear the tyres chirping away in pain.
A little bit wider there, Taylor Barnard, but he's got a nice tight line coming through here. Looks pretty good. But Nick de Vries is definitely building up the momentum as he's now coming through the faster section of the circuit.
Yeah, this is going to be very interesting to see how it works out. 0.07 of a second between them in sector 1. De Vries a 20.493 in sector 2. What can Taylor Barnard do in response to that through the fast and frighteningly blind corners? And Barnard building out a bit more of an advantage to over 1/10 of a second. So de Vries is going to have a brilliant final sector, or hope that Barnard doesn't have such a corker. At the final corner we go for Nick de Vries. Comes to take the checkered flag. A 1.7 flat then for the former world champion. And Taylor Barnard, again, continues on an absolute flyer then here. He is just pulling it out of the bag, lap after lap. Here in Jakarta, comes to the timing line and does go through into the finals, out-qualifying Nick de Vries by nearly 0.3 of a second. Ian James delighted with the performance of his young driver, and Barnard versus Dennis in the fight for pole position here in Jakarta.
That was a very neat lap by Barnard at the end. If you look how close he's getting to the walls, and it's consistently as well, so he's got a very good feeling for sense of where he is, and the car is relative to those walls. And that's going to definitely, well, it has been so far, because that lap he's done there in the semi is the quickest of today so far.
Grant Clark, race engineer for Taylor Barnard. great partnership that is clearly working well in the youngster's rookie season. He just seems to be driving with maturity beyond his years. 21 years of age he is, made his debut in Monaco last year, substituting for Sam Bird, put in a couple of great performances in his first couple of weekends, got the full-time drive for this year and has really taken full advantage of it and will now be going into that fight for pole.
Right, so that was the semi-finals. Obviously, as just mentioned, Dennis and Barnard will be going through it to the final to fight out for pole position, whereas Cassidy and De Vries both lose out on their chance. And it's something I didn't realise before, but De Vries and Barnard fought each other in that duel just then, and they are the ones who got the exact same time in the Group B. So I find that quite coincidental. Also, the fact that Barnard can't seem to stay away from having really close times today, apart from in his battle just then with De Vries, because it was 5/10 difference, I believe, before with him and Tictum. I believe it was, at least. So that means that they will be the front row of the grid, I believe. I've noticed something, however, in the duels we just had, the fact that they all seem to be making a certain mistake and losing time, and I think it's in the exact same place that they're losing time. I can't tell whether it's in the final corner or in the... It's not really a hairpin, but it's like one. I'd call it more a bobby pin, to be honest. Do you know how they kind of like have a bump to them? It's like a hairpin with a bump, so like a bobby pin. For those that don't know what a bobby pin is, look it up. Because for all I know, you might know what it is, but they might call it something different. Because I think everywhere calls it something different. Right. So, whilst TNT are on ad break, which I find really annoying. I hate when there's ad breaks in between the sessions. And there's just nothing going on. There's so much to talk about. But as someone who is not done this often, I'm more stuck with it. They're finding what to talk about. Not a job. Right, so Dennis and Barnard. Who will win out, I wonder? I want to say Barnard, because Barnard has been really consistent throughout all of today and even topped the session in the Group B one, whereas Dennis came second, yeah, and that's really good, but I feel like it's going to be Barnard. You watch, it's going to be Dennis. But I'm going to put my bets on Barnard taking pole position. Though Dennis and Cassidy, Dennis wins with that battle just then. That was entertaining. Oh, and I believe we're back from our break now, and you can see the drivers cooling off right now. I think that's Dennis cooling off himself.
Cockpit of the Andretti Porsche. Very hot and very humid here in Jakarta, and a probability of thunderstorms throughout the rest of the day as well. It hit this morning ahead of FP2, and whilst it has been dry since free practice 2, there is still a strong possibility of it returning. It's actually quite a dry part of the year, believe it or not, for this part of Indonesia, but there is a very realistic probability that it could return prior to the start of the E-Prix, or maybe even during the E-Prix, just to spice things up. Let's see how that goes. Anyway, whilst we're waiting for Dennis versus Barnard in the round 12 finals, let's go down and catch up with Dan Tictum, who sadly is not part of this stage of qualifying.
Dan Tictum, it was so close right up until the end in that battle. Talk me through your lap. How are you feeling?
It was pretty good. I mean, look, I don't think any teams have learned anything this weekend so far, because the track just changes every lap, every session. So in that sense, it's quite good for the drivers, as long as the car's in a reasonable window, which mine was. But it's a lot about, adapting fast and, there's only one line 'cause it's so dirty offline, so it's very difficult to sort of thread the needle and put a good lap together. I think there, you know, if I to do that lap again, there was, I think, 2 places where I could have gained a bit of time, but I'm sure Taylor will say the same, and so will everyone else. Like, it's impossible to go out there and just nail a lap in those conditions. So, but I'm pretty happy with the lap. I think P5 for the race. So, yeah, it's going to be almost impossible to overtake. So, yeah, it's just annoying. Just Taylor's, yeah, just annoying little oik. So, anyway, yeah.
Thank you, Dan. Nick De Vries, starting on the second row of your grid at your 1/8 home race. How are you feeling?
I think I'm pretty pleased with P3 on the grid. It was a challenging start of the day, but also yesterday track conditions were very tricky, very dusty, and this morning we obviously started with a wet track with a very narrow trajectory, so didn't allow for much error. So yeah, I'm kind of happy with what we executed. Obviously, I would have liked to have a shot at the pole in the last duels, but yeah, it wasn't quite enough, and I think Taylor did a better job.
And both Mahindras into the dual stages, the only team to have managed that today. That's got to be a good sign of things to come this afternoon.
I mean, I think this afternoon is going to be a very different race, but it's definitely great for the team to have yeah, both cars in the duels, and we're happy with that.
Thank you, Nick. Nick Cassidy, starting from the second row of the grid after a really tricky start this morning with the issues to your car. Are you feeling pleased?
Yeah, I'm really pleased. I mean, to be honest, I feel we've massively over-delivered in this qualifying session. The last lap was a bit of I made a bit of a dog's meal of that, but honestly, I think starting 4th is probably a lot higher than we should be. The 3 cars around us are clearly faster, so we maximised everything we had.
And yeah, you're the only Jag powertrain to have made it into the duels. Sorry, you're not the only Jag powertrain to make it into the duels, but certainly outperformed some of the others. Do you think you can fight with them going into the race?
I'm not sure. Yeah, clearly we missed a little bit of performance, but we're executing really well right now, so really proud of my team, and we're just, yeah, give it our best shot, and it was nice to see Seb in the duels as well.
Thank you, Nick.
Yeah, good to hear there for some of the drivers who sadly were not lucky enough to make it through into the finals. An annoying little oink is what Taylor Barnard was christened by Dan Tickton there. Anyway, these are the drivers that were in the duels, in the quarterfinals, the semi-finals, and indeed now all eyes on the finals. Jake Dennis versus Taylor Barnard. British drivers meeting for the 4th time in season 11. So how is this one going to go down? The season 9 world champion versus a driver who probably will end up being a world champion one day. 80% of you reckon it'll go the way of Taylor Barnard. Last time we saw Jake Dennis on pole position was back in Berlin almost a year ago. Last time we saw Taylor Barnard on pole position was in Monaco a couple of months ago. So the momentum certainly with the Neil McLaren driver as the drivers exit out onto the circuit in a few moments' time and get themselves ready for their one and only flying lap here. Jake Dennis will lead out Taylor Barnard. What's going through your mind as a driver, Alan, when you've got just this one shot to do it? You've put in a couple of great laps to get into the finals, and now it is the most important part of your weekend.
Nothing's really going through your mind because you're just focusing on what you're going to do. So it's a case of you want to get out onto the circuit to start the process. You know, the worst part is actually sitting in the pits. It's the hottest part as well because the car's hot in and around you and you're just sitting there sweating in an uncomfortable environment, wanting to be out in the circuit driving. But now is the important point, making sure that they build and prep in the right way, understanding where the points on the circuit where they can take a bit more risk, a bit more out to the limit of it without necessarily compromising with the potential of a big mistake there. And both of them are very good for different reasons. Obviously, Jake Dennis a bit more experience, but right now there's a lot of confidence in Taylor Barnard as well. And I think this is going to be super, super tight. But whichever one actually wins this particular battle, it's going to actually have an effect on the driver's title because they'll both move one position up in the driver's title if that's the case, with the points for pole.
Yeah, absolutely. Taylor Barnard currently 4th in the drivers' standings on 86 points as Jake Dennis comes across the timing line to begin his flying lap then here, down the long start-finish straight into the fast and fearsome first corner for the season 9 world champion. Looks okay for him through there. You can see him harrying the car through the tight and twisty turns 2 and turn 3. Got the car rotated pretty well. What about Taylor Barnard?
Nice neat through there by Jake Dennis, very tight. And a little bit quicker, but fractionally quicker for Taylor Barnard so far.
Yeah, first sector for Jake Dennis, an absolute stonker. 19.5 for the Andretti driver. What can Barnard do in response to that? It's quicker still, 2/100ths of a second faster for Taylor Barnard in the Neon McLaren.
Yeah, a little bit of margin out to the wall there for Jake Dennis as he came through turn 12 into the hairpin at 13.
This is going to be mightily close as Dennis comes through into the final sector. Barnard with a snap of oversteer there through turn 12 might cost him 0.5 of a second or so. What can Dennis do, though?
Barnard's made a mistake at the hairpin.
Yeah, Barnard makes a mistake down at turn 13, so that's going to gift Jake Dennis pole position surely as we come out of the final corner. Dennis comes across the timing line, a 1:06.713 for Jake Dennis, and Barnard with a mistake on his final flying lap here in this session. Out of the final corner we go for Taylor Barnard, and it is not going to be enough to depose Jake Dennis and deny the Season 9 World Champion his first pole position since Berlin last year back in May. Jake Dennis and Andretti are back on top here in Formula E. They will start from the front of the grid for round 12 this afternoon.
Yes. It's nice to see Roger Griffiths, the team principal of the Andretti organisation, they're smiling because they're working hard to build this back up, and Jake Dennis has delivered a very, very nice lap there. A 6.7, exactly the same lap time as they basically did in the semis.
Well, the pressure was on to Jake Dennis's shoulders there, but he really did respond. This is where it all went wrong, though, for Taylor Barnard down at turn 13. You saw him get in there, big snap of oversteer mid-corner, gathered it up, but unfortunately the damage was already done.
Yeah, he just pushed a little bit too quick into the hairpin. Here we see him coming through 12, slightly wide there, but he was neat and tidy. He's turned in early, and now he's just had that snap of oversteer. And that was the difference between pole and second.
Yeah, just slightly wide going in there for Taylor Barnard, and that is all she wrote for the 21-year-old. Front row of the grid, though, for Neon McLaren. Will not be a bad place to start from, albeit they'll be on the dirty side, and I put an emphasis on the word dirty there because it is very dusty and dirty offline here in Jakarta.
Right, so I'm going to stop them there since I'm on quick offs all the time since I've barely had any sleep. Or at least sleep that's not interrupted. So I'm going to go to bed after this. And it's Barnard robbed of pole position due to a mistake. And I can't help but wonder that if it hadn't have rained, would that mistake have been able to catch him? Well, Dennis starts on pole position for Jakarta in the race. I don't know whether it transmits into both races. I believe it does. So he starts on pole position with Barnard in second. You know what? Front row of the grid, it's a good place to be. So they're both, I'm sure, are very happy right now. Apparently, though, Barnard starting on the dirty side of the grid, though I can only assume that maybe they'll clear that up in the gap between now and the race this morning in a couple of hours' time, I believe. Thank you for watching, and please go to all the other streams that will be going on this channel, as well as on JB Motorsports 2, which will be having the MotoGP sessions for today. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.